Thank you. Yes, good morning to all of you. One is awake. Who? Thank you. Yes, please come and join us. We'll be started in a few minutes. Okay, while people are coming and finding their seats, I will tell you a little story, which is actually related to the theme of this conference. Now it's the time to act. This morning, when I was having a breakfast with my two kids, they are 12 and 17 years old. We finished breakfast and I got up and I said to them, okay, you just finished your breakfast. When you're finished, I would like you to take your own plate and your own cup and bring it to the kitchen. And then Mom will come and take care of all the rest of it, as she usually do. So, and then I went off to the shower and did my things, and I passed the table like 3 or 4 times. And guess what? Nothing has happened. So I got kind of bitchy, thinking, okay, where's the respect? I'm their mom. They should do what I'm telling them to do. Yes, please come in, find a seat. So, as I said, I got kind of bitchy, maybe childish, so I just took my own plate, my own cup, and I brought it to the kitchen and throw it in the sink. Very noisy. So I would make sure that they will hear it. And then I went off. And guess what? Next time I passed the table, it was fixed. Actually, the kids had taken not only their own stuff, but all of it. So, point being, children don't do what they are told to do. They do what you do. And I think that's that only goes for children, it goes from all of us. So now is the time to act. I think it's always the time to act. So I want you to remember that when you finish this conference. It's what you do that counts. Actually, I had this teacher at the Danish School of Journalism, and on the very first day I was in class, he told us, no matter what you do, radio, TV, write an article, show it, don't tell it. So that was a little story for you. Okay. Did you have a good evening yesterday? There used to be plenty of people in here. How many of you went to the concert? I was there. Okay. Well, sadly, I missed it because I went to my job afterwards here. I should never have done that. But I heard there was about 700 people or so. Maybe someone is still there. I can see that. Okay. Okay, we'll give it 2 more minutes, and then we will start the first plenary of the day. Good morning to you. Yeah. Oh, the coffee machine is working now? Yes. It was, oh, yeah, it is. There are plenty of seats over here for you. Okay, I think we should get things rolling, as there are plenty of things of the agenda today. So, good morning. Could we do it again? Good morning. Thank you, it makes me so happy. So, sadly enough, this is our last day together having fun. There have been a lot of great discussions, many good takeaways, and especially some very excellent speakers. And yesterday evening when I left from here, I was actually thinking of all the speakers I have heard and all the great people I have already met. Of course, there's plenty of it during the day today. But one came in mind, and this was Kumi from Amnesty International. He was in the plenary yesterday. They were discussing what kind of action we can actually do moving forward after this conference, and in all. Like, are there any hopes for humankind? The planet will be fine. And then Kumi actually said, he said a lot of good things, but the thing that I heard was, we should do more yoga and meditation. You know what's coming? So actually, 10 years ago, I got my hands on this book written by an Indian yogi called Manmohan. I got the book, I read it, I went to India, might be there, but I went there. I found this guy, and I have been his student for 10 years now. So I agree with Kumi. Now, yoga is, of course, it's a spiritual journey, but in our everyday life, it's about taking responsibility of our own actions. It's about being aware, being present, notice what's going on. And now you might think, hey, that's easy, I'm already doing yoga. But come on, guys. I have seen you for the last 3 days entering this room. Many of you will enter like this, looking at your cell phone. And many of you will just be going like this. So, point being, our thoughts is always ahead of us. It's always thinking on the next thing that is going to happen. And our big head with all these thoughts are dragging our body along with it. So, it's actually very rare that we are present. And present is what I would very much like you to be for the next plenary. So, we are going to do together a little yoga thingy. Don't worry, you don't have to change clothes. I'm not talking about the downward dogs or anything. It's a breathing exercise. So, you can just be seated, be relaxed. I will try to be grounded in my high heels, standing like this. So, just try to relax for a moment. This will only take a minute, okay? Put away your cell phones. You can tweet afterwards. I saw that. No. Okay. And then try to take just one deep breath. Okay. Yeah. Inhale, exhale. Nothing fancy about it. Just do what you do every second. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, you guys. Last time I checked, we weren't carrying our lungs around on our shoulders. Okay? So when I ask you to breathe, don't do like this. Okay, you breathe down here. So try to take your shoulder just one time and do it like this. What is happening? No, yeah, okay. Okay, then you put your hands on your stomach. Okay, let me just take one last deep breath. Inhale, exhale. okay? Thank you. So now, when you walk around, try to show yourself, try to show your heart, going like this. I'm here. I'm aware of what's going on. Okay? So now I think, before you fall asleep, that I should introduce you to the first plenary. After this plenary, I'll be back on the podium because I have a few information that I would like to share with you. So please be seated. Don't let your head drag you out to the coffee machine before I'm back here, okay? So the first plenary is about implementation of the Article 16 of the SDGs. Thank you. So I would like you to give a very warm welcome to the moderator of the next plenary and also to the speakers. Please welcome Mr. Ruben Lefuka, Vice Chair, Transparency International. Please join me on the scene. And also Jorge Harte, former Controller General from Brazil. Please join me too. Rose Hill Hearn, yes. Former Commissioner of the New York City Department of Investigations. Pascal Helene Dubois, Vice President, World Bank. Yeah. Professor Peter Eigen, Founder and Chairman, Advisor Council for Transparency International. Yes. And Mr. Cheng Guomeng, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Director General of the Department of Case Review, National Commission and Supervision from China. Ruben, the scene is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to today's plenary discussion. In the past 2 days, we have listened to and participated in many discussions that have clearly identified the challenges posed by corruption to our communities and for economic development. The question that has been raised by many is, are there any solutions to the problems of corruption? Is there a global framework to address corruption? It is common knowledge that in 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Goals were adopted. The SDG framework in Goal 16 makes an explicit link between corruption and building inclusive and peaceful societies. The emphasis made in Goal 16 is that reducing corruption is an important component of the Sustainable Development Agenda, which all state parties have an obligation to address. This morning, the presenters or the panelists will address the progress that has been made by various actors in implementing Goal 16. We'll equally look at some of the challenges faced. I have the honor of introducing to you a distinguished panel of speakers. Let me start by introducing Pascal Dubois. Pascal is a Belgian national and became the World Bank Group's Integrity Vice President on July 1st, 2017. She will explain what the Integrity Vice President's office does, but Ms. Dubois has played a leading role in the World Bank's anti-corruption efforts for close to 2 decades. And she previously served as the World Bank's first Chief Suspension and Debarment Officer in the Office of Suspension and Debarment, where she determined whether to suspend and debar firms and individuals accused of fraud and corruption in World Bank finance projects. But before that, Ms. Dubois managed the voluntary disclosure program in INT, and she has also worked as an operational lawyer advising the Africa region of the World Bank for 7 years. And before joining the World Bank, she was a lawyer in private practice for 10 years in the United States and Belgium. Ms. Dubois, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Let me introduce next to Mr. Dubois, Professor Dr. Peter Eigen. He has worked in economic development and governance for several decades and has led initiatives for better global governance and the fight against corruption. A lawyer by training, Peter Eigen has worked as a World Bank manager in programs in Africa and Latin America. And from 1988 to 1991, he was the director of the regional mission for Eastern Africa of the World Bank. In 1993, Peter Eigen founded Transparency International, a non-government organization promoting transparency and accountability in international development. And from 1993 to 2005, he was chair of TI and is now the chair of the Advisory Council. And in 2005, Peter chaired the International Advisory Group of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and was chair from 2006 to February 2011. You're welcome, Peter Eigen.
Thank you.
Next to Peter is Vice Minister Chen Guomeng from China. He's currently Director General, which is the vice ministerial level of the Department of Case Review in the National Supervision Commission and a member of the 19th Central Commission for Discipline Inspection of the Communist Party. He has previously served as president of the Higher People's Courts, Municipal Intermediary People's Courts, as well as District People's Courts in various provinces and districts in China. Vice Minister, you're welcome. May I also introduce to you Madam Rose Gil-Hen. Rose Gil-Hen is currently a principal at Bloomberg Associates. She previously served as commissioner of the New York City Department of Investigation from 2002 through to 2013 and was the longest-serving commissioner in its 140-year history. In 2013, Rose helped create the Center for the Advancement of Public Integrity at Columbia Law School, which focuses on accountability in government and municipal jurisdictions throughout the world, and she chairs its advisory council. Prior to her appointment at DOI, Rose was a federal prosecutor for 10 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where she served as Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division and Chief of the Crime Control Strategy Unit. She's authored a number of articles and has hosted and presented at conferences on anti-corruption policies in the U.S. and internationally. You're welcome, Rose.
Thank you.
Last but not the least, I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. George Hedge. He told me there are several ways of pronouncing his last name, so I've picked Hedge, so I hope you allow me to do that. He served as Minister of State, head of the Comptroller General's Office of Brazil from 2006 to 2015. Previously, he was Executive Secretary of the Comptroller General's Office and served as an OAS international consultant in public administration and missions in Argentina and Venezuela. He's now the senior partner of Hedge Compliance Consultants. George, you're welcome. So we'll start our interaction with a first round of introductions. Each of the presenters will introduce what they're doing, but they'll also respond to a question that I'll ask. And I'll start with Pascal. The World Bank, Pascal, has a zero-tolerance policy towards corruption in its projects. The bank subjects all potential projects to rigorous scrutiny and works with clients to reduce possible corruption risks that have been identified. My question to you is, how do you identify these corruption risks in international development projects?
Thank you. So the Integrity Vice Presidency, which I head, is the unit at the World Bank, which receives allegations of fraud and corruption in World Bank finance projects. So that's what the World Bank has jurisdiction over. So in INT, for short for integrity, we have 3 business lines. We investigate, we prevent, and then we also work together with companies that have been previously in trouble. I think what we do at the bank, both in INT and also in the governance global practice, and I see Debbie Wetzel, who's the head, is sitting there, as well as in the stolen asset recovery project, which is a joint UN and ODC project. what we're all doing together, both on anti-corruption and governance, very much is in line with SDG 16, which is, to substantially reduce corruption. Now, the way that things work at the World Bank and the Integrity Vice Presidency is that we first and foremost investigate. I mean, that's what we were set up for 20 years ago. So we receive allegations from a number of sources, and once we think that we've substantiated the allegations of fraud and corruption, we'll send it on to the sanction system. So the office for which I used to work, Office of Suspension and Debarment, and then if there's an appeal to the sanctions board. Now, investigations is obviously only one part of the total picture, because you're only as good as your preventive actions as well. And so we very much have a balance between investigations and prevention. I like to say that investigations is what gets people's attention, right? Enforcement is what gets people's attention. And once you have people's attention, it's a good idea that to then focus also on prevention, because then you maximize the effects of the investigation. In the same vein, whenever we debar a company, and so debarment of a company means exclusion, that's what the Europeans call it. So if there is sufficient evidence of fraud and corruption in a contract financed by the World Bank will debar a company, say, for a number of years. 2 to 3 years is usually the average. And then before a company can be undebarred, before it can be taken off the public debarment list, it will have to work with the Integrity Compliance Office, and she's also here in Denmark today, Lisa Miller. She's the Integrity Compliance Officer. And so companies will have to prove to the World Bank, to Lisa Miller, that they have now put in place a compliance program, meaning they have to give us the satisfaction that the company has changed the ways that it's doing business. So this is very much giving an incentive to corporates to change the way that they're doing business. So when you're looking at what the World Bank is trying to do, and the twin goals of the World Bank, which is to eradicate extreme poverty and also promote shared prosperity, what we're doing in integrity and governance very much fits within the World Bank mandate. Anti-corruption is very much pro-poor. I would also say that anti-corruption is very much pro-business, because at the end of the day, us going after, for lack of a better word, corporations who have engaged in fraud and corruption, it very much levels the playing field for those other corporations that do not engage in corruption. So I'll stop here for the introductory remarks.
But maybe just a follow-up question. Are you seeing a drop in the number of companies that are debarring, or in actual fact more are being debarred? And is that a cause for concern?
It's pretty much a stable number, yeah. So I think last year, again, we had about the same number that we had the year before. I think it was about 78. I'm tend to not really focus on the total numbers, because first of all, they're rather small samples. And if you see, for instance, I sometimes get asked the question, like, if in a particular country allegations went up, is that a bad thing? Does that mean that corruption is worse? Well, actually, it might be a very good thing. Because if allegations go up, it means that civil society, that the government is comfortable doing something about the corruption in a particular country. So I wouldn't exactly always be focused on a total number. What I think is clear is that if there's an opportunity for corruption, it will happen. It's something that remains very commonplace. It's part of human nature, I find. What's important is how the governments and how international institutions and how the corporates and how civil society reacts to the corruption. And so what we very much see is a difference in attitude amongst the populations, worldwide. It's quite clear that civil society, the populations worldwide no longer accept those levels of corruption. The same thing for corporates and for governance. Yeah. It comes and goes. Huh? Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But what we can definitely say, and very much thanks to Peter Eigen and starting TI, is that what we see now, and if you compare it to when you first started, it's a sea of change. Yeah? So I'm quite positive about the future. Yeah.
Okay. Vice Minister Chen, as China, as the world's leading exporter, has a special responsibility, I believe, in respect to practices of its companies and business people abroad. Transparency International, in its latest report, Exporting Corruption, in which China is included as a non-OECD country in the assessment of the enforcement of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, concluded that there has been no non-enforcement by China against foreign corrupt practices by its companies, citizens, or residents. However, I note that the newly established National Supervision Commission has broad enforcement powers that cover 88 categories of duty crimes, including foreign bribery cases. The question to you is, how are you addressing or intending to address foreign bribery cases? And would you also speak to the progress you've made in fugitive repatriations?
好，谢谢主持人。首先向大家表示歉意，因为我不能讲英语，所以还得劳驾大家带上同步翻译的设备。很高兴参加这一次大会。受中共中央纪委和国家监委领导的委托，对本次会议表示祝贺。中国这几年加大了反腐败斗争的力度，主要是基于领导人的决心。我们要求党内全面从严治党，抓住领导干部的关键的少数，反腐败无禁区，全覆盖零容忍。我们从2012年到今年的9月，总共查处的违法违纪的腐败的高级干部已经达到了479人，反腐败的压倒性的态势已经完全形成了。应该说，腐败是世界公害，它严重影响着世界的和平和稳定。对此，我们中国政府采取了有力的措施。19大以后，我们就进行了一项改革，就是设立国家监察委员会。这也是我们国家监察体制改革的一个重要的一个方面。今年的3月已经挂牌成立了。这个机构是全国的最高监察机关，下面还有3级的机构共同来负责这个反腐败的监察全覆盖。那么，对于刚才主持人所提的这个问题确实是这样。我们中国对反腐败工作高度重视。应该说，世界上是没有一个国家是依靠腐败发展经济的。我们在实践中也发现了这么一个规律：一个廉洁的政府，一个规则公平的市场，它就是最好的一个投资的软环境。所以，我们在对我们的企业也提出了这样的要求。我们在企业中，特别是到海外投资的企业，我们都加大对企业腐败的惩治力度，打击这个权力的寻租空间，清除市场机制运行的一些障碍。发挥市场配置资源的作用。这不但有利于 世界经济的发展，也有利于中国经济的健康持续发展。它不但不会影响我们的经济，反而会起促进作用。所以我们也很欢迎世界各国的企业家都到中国投资，也为我们的经济建设和廉政建设做同样的贡献。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Vice Minister Chen. Let me come to Rose. As Bloomberg Associates, you advise and help city governments to successfully tackle complex and difficult challenges to positively impact on the quality of life of their citizens. I'd like to understand what role local or city governments can play to prevent corruption in achieving important SDG targets related to health, education, ending hunger, among others, and how you're helping these local governments achieve these SDG targets.
Thank you, Ruben. It's a pleasure to be here in Copenhagen and to be at the IHCC and to be with my fellow panelists. Bloomberg Associates, just to maybe quickly tell you a little bit about it, it's not, I think, such a large known organization, and it's a little bit unique. It was established 5 years ago by Mayor Michael Bloomberg following his 12-year mayoralty in New York City. And we are a multidisciplinary pro bono city consulting firm. Our clients are always going to be cities. Mike was the mayor of New York City. Half the population of the world is in cities. And we think that the power to touch people's lives really is at the city or local level, which is why that is where our focus is, and our clients are the mayors of US cities and international cities only. There we do a wide variety of projects on a philanthropic basis in the areas of transportation, social services, urban planning, etc. And the practice that I run, of course, as Ruben has mentioned, is the municipal integrity and transparency practice, where we provide guidance and operational support for cities to implement projects that reduce opacity and increase efficiency, reduce bureaucracy. All of these are ingredients of corruption vulnerabilities. Why am I doing that for Bloomberg Associates? Because for 12 years, I served in New York City as the head of the anti-corruption department, which is known as the Department of Investigation in New York City. It's the largest anti-corruption agency in the United States with citywide jurisdiction over the executive branch, the legislative branch, over 300,000 city employees, all of the city vendors, and anybody receiving city funds. So billions and billions of dollars. We also had oversight of the city's construction program, which was in and of itself another multi-billion-dollar venture. And so the goals that I had as DOI commissioner, trying to keep a large radar screen under control, were corruption prevention, investigations, enforcement, and then remediation. And so I put a big focus on prevention and created a training program and did over 6,000 anti-corruption trainings for city employees and vendors over my 12-year tenure. We did over 6,700 arrests on corruption-related charges in New York. We ran a hotline and received thousands of tips and complaints every year, similar to the work that Pascal was talking about. And then because we were part of city agency, unlike other law enforcement agencies like the FBI, we stayed behind and we helped to fix the problem that caused the corruption. And so over 3,000 of our written policy and procedure recommendations to eliminate corruption vulnerabilities, to strengthen internal controls, were implemented throughout the city's 45 agencies. So I think that these concepts are very similar to your SDG 16 in a way. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. When I first joined the Department of Investigation, many people came forward and told us about an agency called the Housing Development Corporation, which is a powerful housing finance agency. And the president of the agency, we learned, and as a matter of public record became the fact, was known that he was using the agency as a piggy bank. And so a journalist, apropos of some of the comments made earlier this week, received a tip and was onto this scheme and began to file Freedom of Information requests with that agency. But because the head of the agency was part of the root cause of the corruption, he was suppressing those Freedom of Information requests. And so this scheme was able to go on for years, unabated. People were afraid of him, and he was putting the press off through that means. And so we cracked this case open as a result of arriving newly in the administration, and people felt comfortable coming forward at that point. But I took a look at how this could have happened in addition to the fact that he was suppressing Freedom of Information requests. And by the way, we conducted the investigation. There was an indictment, a conviction, and he went to jail, but stayed behind to determine how did this happen. The answer had to do with the fact that this agency was a quasi-city agency. Part of its jurisdiction was under the state, part was under the city. And therefore, my department mistakenly assumed that the state was engaging in monitoring and vice versa. And I think neither one was really monitoring this agency, this quasi-city-state agency, properly. So I went to the mayor and said, I would like my department to become the official inspector general for this Housing Development Corporation. We can't have them falling between the cracks. We spoke to the governor's office, and they agreed. And so we did an MOU with HDC, and there was a state law passed making my department the inspector general for this agency. And so for the last 14 or 15 years at this point now, DOI is conducting the proactive monitoring, the backgrounding, the investigations, et cetera, and that agency has not had any major scandals since that time, including because of this additional oversight. Now, as Bloomberg Associates, we are working with US cities and with international cities, again, on a project basis, not doing quite the large scope of work that I did at the Department of Investigation, but bringing some of the lessons of what worked, what didn't work from New York to other cities, such as Mexico City, where we helped them to develop a hotline of their own for people to call. Thousands of people have called this hotline since it was established in Mexico City several years ago. Through our wonderful partners, OCP, Open Contracting Partnership, we also helped bring more contract transparency to Mexico City. This is something that civil society told us was necessary, and I agree with Pascal that this is a very business-friendly thing to do, because as lawyers and business people are trying to determine whether or not they wish to bid on contracts, the more transparency and understanding about the process and who has been awarded contracts in the past that they have, the better and more informed a decision they can make about also wanting to do business in Mexico City. In Rio de Janeiro, similarly, the mayor there asked us to help fix a paper-based business licensing system, which was also quite corruption-prone. Intermediaries could help you for a price to get your business license, but it took a long time. Many hand-to-hand steps with different departments were necessary. And so the city did an online new portal for business licensing, which is fantastic. And then we helped them to develop a data dashboard which draws that data about business licenses out of the system and puts it on a public dashboard. And so now companies can see who's getting licenses and where the competition might be. And of course, this is all extremely transparent and good for business. And there are now far fewer unlicensed businesses in Rio. Revenue has gone up for the city as a result of this transparency tool. And I think that this is a common problem in many cities that has been solved quite nicely by the tremendous team that we work with in Rio. So these are some examples, Ruben, of how I think we're applying the same kinds of concepts as SDG 16.
Okay, thank you very much. Peter, you've been involved in a number of initiatives which are anchored on promoting the multi-stakeholder approach. Is a multi-stakeholder approach, or the golden triangle as you've sometimes referred to, relevant in achieving results under Goal 16? And if so, just explain to us how it can be done.
Well, I think, Ruben, Goal 16 is a very good reflection of the fact that corruption is pervading so many different sectors, so many different parts of society, health, politics, natural resources, that it is a good illustration of the theme, basically, of this conference, that we have to cooperate. We have to find ways to cooperate in order to cover all these different aspects which are affected by corruption in order to create a more peaceful, more just, more participatory world. Now, let me just go back one minute. I mean, I'm so delighted about the presentation of Pascal, because the World Bank, at the time when I was still working there, reflected very much the overall consensus that there is a very poor global governance, that therefore governments, national governments, governments of sovereign states, were not able to prevent international corruption. And therefore, even very good governments, with the honorable exception of the United States with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, they allowed their citizens to bribe everywhere in the world, and even made this tax deductible, because they thought this is inevitable and therefore we have to allow it. Even countries like Germany, which has a strong government, and countries like France, the United Kingdom, Japan, you all remember that until 1999, they allowed their citizens to systematically bribe everywhere in the world. Now, this was reflected in the board of the World Bank, which has had now about 185 member countries or so, and therefore, there was a consensus that the World Bank should not get involved and stop international corruption. They brought all kinds of excuses. They refer to the charter of the World Bank, but didn't give a mandate to fight international corruption and so on. And so when I discovered, as director of the World Bank office in Nairobi, that most of the things we were trying to do in East Africa, for instance, were being undermined by corruption. And when we started a task force to develop a systemic approach for the World Bank to protect the people of Africa against this sort of unholy alliance between the people coming from the West, coming from the North, bribing right and left the decision makers in Africa, but also in Latin America and Asia, the World Bank didn't allow me to do that. In fact, in 1999 and 1991, they asked me to leave the bank if I wanted to pursue this. So this is so incredible what you are reporting right now. In the meantime, and I think we should refer to Jim Wolfenson, because basically in 1997, he began to turn the World Bank from Saulus to Paulus, and it is now, I would say, one of the most powerful anti-corruption agencies in the world. So you ask, Ruben, whether there is a global framework for fighting corruption, whether indeed there is an institutional and procedural framework which can help us to implement the demands and the sense of Goal 16. I would say yes, because since this time, which led to the OECD Convention Against Foreign Bribery, which led to the UN Convention Against Corruption, many regional conventions, many institutions, including private sector companies, now trying to fight corruption. Since this time, there is a broad global consensus on how deadly, how devastating corruption is everywhere where it is allowed to flourish. But it is extremely diffuse. There are many different centers of corruption, fighting corruption controls. Some of them are within civil society, and I would say their contribution, civil society organizations, to turn around this sort of scandalous situation which we had until 1999 was fundamental. Now, these many different centers have to cooperate. And this brings me back to this question, you know, the Article 16 is very diffuse. It wants to address many different sectors. And the question is therefore, do we have a framework for this? And I say yes, if we understand that we have to closely cooperate. Some people at this conference have argued strongly that we have to redefine the term corruption. They have said sexual violence is corruption. They say money laundering is corruption. They say destroying the climate is corruption. I say no, these are different issues, but they are driven by corruption. They are surrounded by corruption. And if we can fight corruption, then these other issues can be dealt with. So I must say, I personally feel we have to focus, for instance, with Transparency International, on corruption issues. But then, of course, we have to recognize, we have to cooperate with Amnesty International, fighting human rights, with Greenpeace, fighting climate change, and so on, with the World Bank, and with the private sector. And this brings me to this question of multi-stakeholder approaches. I must say, and I was so happy to hear this yesterday from a number of people, including from Mark Moody-Stewart, who was very eloquent about this. Very often the cooperation of governments and the private sector are not the solution, because very often they collude, they cooperate, they, in fact, in many areas, and we in Germany, we see an example of this right now, how, for instance, the car industry has tremendous influence on the government. But we also see this in America with their sort of political party financing. How do I call it? I would call it a scandal. We see this in many parts of the world. This interaction between government and private sector is very often not the solution. You need a third player. And this is why I'm talking about the sort of magical triangle of good governance, this interaction between government, civil society, and private sector. And that we have now introduced, for instance, in the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, where this is even built into the system. And I'm right now pursuing a number of other transparency initiatives which are based on this multi-stakeholder approach. In the fisheries sector, we started something in the textile sector, we start something in other sectors which are particularly hard to control. And so this is my experience. And if we can adopt this as a mantra, first of all, we have to cooperate. We have to cooperate in these various areas, you know, like sextortion or like environmental destruction and so on. We have to closely interact. And I don't know yet how we can do this because there is competition between these various actors, and we have to try to find a way to interact very closely without losing our independence and the focus on the sectoral strengths which we have and the expertise and the tools which we have on the one hand, but then also try to have a governance system which is carried mainly by a multi-stakeholder deliberation as we have in EITI. So this is basically my mantra, and I would like to pursue this as much as possible with my work in this area.
I'd have to stop you at that point. You told me that even when you wake up at night, you shout multi-stakeholder groups. So I know you can go on talking about this for a very long time. But George, let me turn to you. Brazil goes to the polls the second round of voting in the presidential election on October 28th. And there are many opinions and fears about the rise of populism, not just in Brazil, but around the world. Do you see Brazil, post the elections, being on track in attaining Goal 16?
Well, looking at the Goal 16 of Sustainable Development, I think, as seen from the point of view of Brazil, the progress is at very serious risk. At this point of my particular experience, I would say that beyond the obvious effects of corruption to poverty, to inequality, to human rights, to public services, and to sustainable development itself, beyond this, our conclusion, first of all, is that corruption can be disastrous to democracy, to the democratic system, to the political representative systems. And also, corruption can be obviously deadly to the economy. But, on the other hand, the fight against corruption needs to be conducted properly, in an adequate way, with an eye to some possible side effects, as I want to name them. Some side effects of the fight against corruption can be very dangerous, because the fight against corruption in itself can contribute to reduce the trust in politics, in representative democracy itself, in our democratic system of government. Why? It depends on the way the fight against corruption is conducted. Our case against corruption in Brazil starts about 15 years ago and can be considered relatively successful up to a certain point and in some aspects. We have achieved this by granting, in the first place, the necessary means and independence to all the institutions that have something to do in this matter. And I mean the Public Prosecutor's Office, the Federal Police, the internal and external control institutions. And secondly, by enacting the appropriate legislation, following the manual of the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, of Transparency International. We have built legislation dealing with liability of natural and legal persons, giving incentives to the adoption of compliance programs, to debarred companies, in the same way the World Bank does, to negotiated agreements and everything else. And this has led to our relative success in fighting against corruption. And more recently, with the famous Operation Care Wash, which is known throughout the world. This has raised extraordinary public awareness of the problem of corruption in Brazil. It was led to the highest possible degree. And we think this is one of the reasons of this relative success. Now, it is also possible that we did not pay attention to some potential consequences, unwanted consequences, for example, of the excessive and untimely exposure of the cases, and a tendency to generalize the condemnation of the political activity. This may have occurred or helped by some particularities that maybe happen only in my country. I don't know how much this is a general problem. For example, the TV broadcasting of police operations, the TV broadcasting of arrestments of big CEOs of companies, the greatest companies in the country, and the highest level of politicians. This was broadcasted in the more open possible way. before any sort of due process of law. And also the broadcasting of the public prosecutors' filing of accusations and suits to the justice. Well, I am sure the disclosure of the fight against corruption is a necessary element for its success. But at this point of our experience, looking back to what has happened, I think we did not take some precautions in order to avoid the misinterpretation that came out of this in terms of demonizing the political activity and also destroying the trust in the institutions. The recent results of our presidential election shows that a very dangerous consequence of this may be occurring in Brazil, which is with the condemnation, generalized demonization of the politicians, you create the conditions for the growth of some kind of messiahs, some kind of outsiders from the politics, or supposedly outsiders, that can present themselves as the saviors of the nation. And this is what I think is putting in danger the fight against corruption in itself, because of the nature of this authoritarian and populist sort of leadership, which does not pose any importance in the institutions and tends to establish a situation where the one opinion is more important than the functioning of the democratic institutions. This is a point in which I have no doubt. We have to address corruption, yes, with transparency and with disclosure, but taking into consideration the risks of overdoing the exposure untimely and generalizing of the condemnations of politics in itself, because without the political activity, the democratic system does not work, cannot function in itself. And this will do more damage in the future, in the next periods, for the fight against corruption in itself. That is our main worry at this moment in my country. When we look at the goal 16 of the sustainable development, we see that all those points will not be certainly object of next steps of progress. For example, significant reduced forms of violence and abuse of exploitation, promote the rule of law, substantially reduce corruption. These are not the things that are going to be prioritized, certainly if the election comes to the result that is most probable at this moment in Brazil. And I think this has similar situations also in other countries around the world where some similarly populist and authoritarian leadership has assumed the power.
All right. I will come back to you later on to talk of what can be done to try and remedy the situation in Brazil and elsewhere. I'm interested to hear from the audience, but before I do that, Pascal, What role can citizens play to prevent corruption in the implementation of development programs as you carry out your work as a World Bank?
Can you
Is there a
repeat the
role?
question? You
Is there a role that citizens can play to prevent corruption in the implementation of these development programs, the ones that the World Bank is financing? Can they report, for instance, abuses that they notice of some of the companies that you're funding?
So we very much, I mean, one of the reasons why we're delighted to be here today is that we very much rely on the civil society to help us in the fight against fraud and corruption. There was one statistic that I bumped into looking at, you know, all these wonderful brochures that people are leaving out yesterday, and that is if you use as the starting point the fact that 25% of global government spending goes to public procurement. Public procurement, so a contract between a government and a contractor, which serves to give, at the end, public services to all of us. If public procurement is not done properly, at the end of the day, the citizens will suffer. At the World Bank, in the contracts that we're financing, the hope is that, again, we reduce poverty and that we promote shared prosperity. All of you in your own countries and around you, you may be seeing things that aren't working in our contracts. And so we very much rely on civil society to come and bring us allegations. One thing that you're going to like is that 40% of the allegations come from World Bank staff themselves, which, you know, you would find very normal because people go supervise the projects, you know, see things and then come and tell us. But the other really comes from, you know, people noticing things, taking photographs. Geotagging works very well, and come and tell us what is going on. So we also hope, and usually what happens is that whenever we speak somewhere, there's a spike in allegations. So if this time we see a spike in allegations from all countries in the world, then that would be a direct result of us being here. If I may, I also wanted to react to something, Georges, that you were saying, and that is that so I've been following anti-corruption pretty much since 2000 and you know, looking at it worldwide. And what one often sees is that there is things start going with one big scandal, right? And then at times, I'm never speaking about one country in particular, right? You know, because we tend to be very diplomatic at the World Bank. But what we see in general is that, you know, in a particular country, there'll be like a big scandal. Sometimes there's a bit of an overreaction, right? And people jump to conclusions too quickly. And at the end of the day, I think the point that you were making, and that's why I was looking at my notes here, SDG 16 very much pushes as well, you know, 16.3, promoting the rule of law, ensuring, you know, equal access, which is what you mentioned, and also developing effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. Systems and processes at the country level are very important. And so sometimes what you see is that, you know, there's a first big case, everybody reacts, maybe overreacts, reacts too quickly, but what one hopes for in the second stage, because that's very important for the trust that people have in a country, is that then institutions are being built. And in investigations, I find that it's actually a very good thing to be very humble and not immediately, you know, mediatize and publicize what is going on, you know. Get the evidence, you know, sit on it, you know, write it up. And I think that's at the end of the day what makes the best cases as opposed to starting to talk about it, you know, too quickly. And I think that's the point that you were making. Yeah.
All right. Peter, you want to make a short intervention?
Yeah, just to amuse the audience, I should say that 50 years ago, I was in the legal department of the World Bank, and I was one of the people drafting the procurement guidelines of the World Bank. And we had very strict sanctions if anybody violated, any bidder and so on, violated a currency clause, an escalation clause, or some confidentiality clauses and so on, except on corruption. When we discovered that there was corruption in the bidding process, we were only allowed to suspend the disbursements or eventually even cancel the loan if a local court had passed a binding final decision on the corruption case. So can you imagine how so a little judge in Kenya would pass a judgment on President Moi or so that he had stolen money. So this was it was a total fake rule at the time, and I'm so happy that this all has changed. Congratulations to the World Bank, and I know that you are, I would say, bringing the other development banks on board with these things, so this is fantastic, thank you.
So the local judge trying to pass judgment against the head of state is a bit like asking the fish to fry itself. But I want to turn to the audience and get your interventions, and just to ask that if you're going to speak, please be brief, introduce yourself, and be brief in your interventions. Let me see those that would like to speak so that I plan my time. I've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 at the end, and 7, you'll be the last one. So let's start with you, sir. Okay. Here, but Peter. Okay. No, the gentleman right in front here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nazar Shah. I'm coming here from Dunedin.
Great Dane.
But two very small and interrelated questions.
Just speak in the mic, please.
Number one, Ms. Pascal, you mentioned that when there is a suspicious case, you investigate and then prevent. If I can hear that from a sense that something going wrong, investigate and then measure for prevention, that's okay. But normally, as a good anti-corruption process, it should be vice versa.
I couldn't agree more. The way that things started at the World Bank was, and you see this at the country level as well, is because some bad things happen, right? You start, the first phase tends to be investigative, but the moment that you start investigating, it would be a pity, right? You get everybody's attention. It would be a pity not to prevent, but very quickly it becomes a total loop. We're constantly preventing, and actually at the World Bank right now, looking again at Debbie Wetzel, we have about 1,000 people who are involved in anti-corruption and governance, most of whom are working on prevention.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to have your idea that what preventive mechanisms there are in the World Bank that we will be happy to know that. And related to that, based on my field experience, one of the good practice for fighting corruptions and suspicious acts are to have a good transparency. If you look at the Dunedin Transparency webpage, we have links to access to all sorts of development information from Dunedin. Even some of the C cases goes on air to share with the general public. And it has a portal to report corruption. But based on my experience interacting with the World Bank officials on the field, sometimes they are pushing back in order to share information. They are a little
We'd like to know about that.
Actually, they are a little bit afraid, especially when there is a suspicious things and donor would like to know that. They're pushing back, and they are very conservative in share information with the donor community. So these are some of the experience that to know, and I would like to bring that home to you to have your dire attention to that. And if you would like to see particular cases for that, so maybe with my one-to-one interaction, I will mention that to you. Thank you very much.
We'll get to Pascal in a bit. So you can note that question or comment, Pascal. The gentleman at the far end.
Good day. I will talk in Arabic إلى Dansk. I will prefer for Arabic, so you can install your microphone. أولاً ألاحظ أن عدد الحضور من الأشخاص من الدول غير الغربية أكبر، وأظن أن الأوروبيين غير مهتمين بمنع الفساد بنفس الدرجة التي يهتم بها المواطنون من الدول غير الأوروبية. ثانياً ألاحظ أن هنالك فساد في كل العالم وفي أوروبا وفي أمريكا، لكن المهم ليس أن نقول أن هنالك فساد أو غير فساد هنا أو هناك، إن من يدير الفساد هي القوانين الخاطئة التي تسهل الفساد وتسهل أن يقوم بعض الناس بالغش هنا أو هناك والرشوة هنا أو هناك. فكثير من القوانين الموجودة في أوروبا وأمريكا تسهل الرشوة والفساد، ويجب تغيير هذه القوانين قبل أن نقول أن هنالك رجل فاسد وهنالك من يرتشي. الأمر الأخير أن هنالك فساد، لكن دائما هنالك من يرشي ومن يأخذ الرشوة، هنالك من يفسد وهنالك من يساعد على الفساد ويأخذ المال. فعندما نريد أن نقاوم الفساد يجب أن يكون هنالك ردع لكل من المفسد والذي يتم إفساده. أخيراً، البنك الدولي ومعظم المؤسسات الدولية ليست نزيهة، وأولاً البنك الدولي لأنه يعمل حسب المصالح السياسية للأعضاء النافذين في البنك الدولي، ومعظم المؤسسات الدولية عبارة عن شركات تديرها الدول ذات المصالح المالية الكبرى.
Okay. All right. I think the third one is there, the fourth, the fifth is at the back, and the sixth is a gentleman here. I'd given numbers. I'll come back to you. I'd given numbers. The gentleman up behind there.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. My name is Bisi Alimi. I'm originally from Nigeria, but I live in the UK. And I really want to say a very big thank you to Peter for some of the things that you highlight in your presentation. I had the opportunity of spending 3 years working with the World Bank between 2013 and 2016. And I was actually involved in the drafting of the current safeguard mechanism by the World Bank. And I would say that some of the things that Peter talked about are still happening. With the fact that the World Bank is still using country mechanism when it's come to project designs. And that for me is a little bit suspicious, because you cannot be fighting corruption and then resolve to using country mechanism. And so if a country mechanism is faulty, the World Bank does not have a rule. And that takes me specifically to my question. I am a gay man. I'm from Nigeria. If you use the country mechanism of Nigeria to implement projects in Nigeria, you are disadvantaging me. Because my country says that I will go to jail for 14 years if I self-express. So when and if you have an HIV project in Nigeria, they have men who have sex with men specification in it. Nigeria will collect the money, but constitutionally will not provide services for me. And eventually the World Bank will not investigate that disadvantage process. And I think it's very important as well, as we leave this place, that in the area of corruption, we're not just talking about system, we're talking about people that are impacted seriously. Increasingly, there is a web of corruption going on across Africa that are impacting LGBT people. We've talked about gender this week. And as we move to the next step, I plead with everyone present here to please look at what is the impact of corruption on sexual orientation and gender identity, not just only in Nigeria, where I come from, but across Africa, where governments are increasingly collecting money with our names, but locking us up in jail and using our money to send their kids to school in international schools. Please, please look into this. It's very important. Thank you very much.
Okay. The gentleman in front. Yeah. Just remember, please be brief.
Thank you, Robin, for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. My name is Kolpriep. I'm from TI, Cambodia. Speaking of working together, I'd like to bring to your attention of a very pressing issues. You said we rely on civil society to provide information, to raise the issues. We have observed an increasing trends of the shrinking of civil society space around the world. How can we be effective in our participation in such a circumstance. We've seen threats, we've seen arrest of civil society. To many cases, we have seen murder. And that happened in my country and many other countries that I have listened and heard from the different sessions. And the trend is unfortunately getting worse. And I expect that it will be even worse in the next IACC when we talk about it. Now, the UNCAC, the UN Conventions Against Corruption, has Article 13 that require member states to encourage active participation of civil society. And this is something that member states are required to do. But what happened is, and oftentimes, there is a deception of how civil society participate in that. They create civil society that pro the government and government themselves support to participate in such a process. And that report to the UN ODC that they have complied with that. What does that really mean?
All right.
And then
I know Paul, you have a lot of things to say. Could I stop you there?
Well, one last question.
Okay. You want to override your vice chair. Okay, be very brief.
Yes, our last one only. In that circumstance, I think the people are getting hopeless because they cannot do much about it. My question is, how can we make people feel more hopeful in such a hopeless situation? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman right at the back, right at the far end. Yeah, let's see if we have time. I'm looking at time. So the gentleman right at the end. Yes. Oh, it's a lady.
I
sorry.
assume you're speaking about me.
Yes, sorry, I'm
if
sorry.
you're not, yeah.
I couldn't see from here. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Tessa Dooms. I'm from Youth Lab in South Africa. My question is really to Peter specifically. We speak about the nexus between government, private sector, and civil society as that corruption nexus. But when we speak about civil society, we're often thinking about them as the benevolent watchdog, the one that comes to intervene and do good. But there's very little accountability of civil society and their participation in corruption or the use of civil society for corruption. And I'm wondering whether TI has a special focus or intends to increase the focus on that. I'll say that because in the context that I work in South Africa around youth development, one of the biggest growing scams in our country is youth employability and youth employment organizations that are creating those spaces to get money from government, money from private sector, that they purport to use for youth development or purport to use for youth employment, but actually are scamming young people and getting them into either low-paid jobs or no jobs, while those companies and those organizations, either in collusion with government or the private sector, are making millions and billions. And there are no mechanisms for me as a youth development worker to report that kind of thing, because that's not where corruption is seen to happen in civil society. So my question is really, how do we hold civil society more accountable for its own internal corrupt tendencies and the use of civil society in corruption broadly? If I can make one final point, which is related to something the chair asked earlier, about the role of the citizen. I think in my experience in the last few days, I think a lot of the conversations have been overly institutionalized. And so we're talking about organizations and institutions and corruption, and we're not really having conversations, I think, in practical ways about the citizen, about individuals, and the way we treat corruption as something that stems from individuals, not just from entities. Because if we continue talking about entities, then entities will just continue to reproduce themselves with people who come into the system without them being challenged about their own ethics, their own values, their own morals. And so there's a need to talk about the citizen not only for its own sake, because the citizen is the smallest unit of the society that we're trying to build in a non-corrupt way.
All right, thank you. The last one is here. The gentleman right in front.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, let's see if we have time. Let's see if there's still more hands, but we only have 10 minutes to wrap up, so.
Hi, my name is Mustafa Mustan, and I'm from Afghanistan. I think I would be speaking of the Naidu effect, if you guys know of that. Who had a speech yesterday over here. The thing is that we have our own definitions of the corruption in every country that I can see the effects over here as well. The thing is that in every country, like when we come to the international level, the third world countries are more forced to have more commitments to fulfill them. Once they fulfill those commitments, we put more on their shoulders, and then we are forcing them to do more. When it comes to, as my Danish colleague brought it up, when it comes to the developed countries, we don't see much of it being done. For example, I don't see any Transparency International biggest outcry about the GM share sale by the previous Canadian government to fulfill its balanced budget commitment to the people, but they sold actually the share of people that was, for their own mismanagement of their budget. Now, when it comes to the American system, where the iron triangle between the military-industrial complex, the president, and the Congress turns the system the way that the foreign policy affects the third world countries, no matter how much commitments they are going to fulfill with, but these foreign policies are trying to affect it. And the third one, when we go to China, as we luckily have their representative over here, what happens in Uyghur, with the Uyghur people, that we are not speaking about it over here, but how they are deprived of the opportunities over there, and then the other ethnicities are brought into their cities and given the opportunities to thrive with the government-provided resources, which should be equally provided for the same people who are from that land and who have to and who deserve more. Thank you.
All right. Let me get some responses, and if we have a bit of time, I'm trying to look for the master of ceremony. If we have a bit of time, we'll come back to the audience again. Vice Minister Chen, there have been a number of questions raised, and I was going to use this opportunity to seek your intervention on shrinking civil society space and how that impacts greatly on the fight against corruption. What's your view on China? Is there space for civil society there? And if it is it large enough to allow civil society to act independently and hold government accountable?
首先，我觉得这个问题的答案是肯定的、积极的。中国改革开放以来啊，对有关的法律体系进行了完善，这一次又对纪检监察的体制进行了完善，所以已经初步形成了社会主义的具有中国特色的法律框架和制度的一些要求。公民在法律上享有充分的权利，言论自由。我们纪检监察机关也是保障公民权利的这么一个强有力的机关。中国有中国的特色，有中国的制度。比如说，国外是议会制度。 我们的制度是人民代表大会，人民代表大会它代表的面更广，所有的代表都是人民选出来的，代表他们在人民代表大会上面发表意见，参政议政，为国家的发展提供自己的 一些意见，包括刚才讲的关于土地、房屋拆迁的问题，都是通过这样的会议，都是通过立法 严格的执法来进行保障的。但是，中国法律规定，土地的所有权不是公民个人的，是国家的。这个规定和其他国家是有本质上的区别的，所以有一些执法的后果肯定和国外的做法不太一样。这个就是我对这个问题的回答。谢谢。
All right. Thank you very much. Peter, there was a question asked about the nexus between civil society, business, etc., but most importantly, how civil society can also be held accountable. What's your view? You've got that experience. Could you briefly speak to that? The question from the lady from South Africa.
Well, if I may, I would like to say one brief word on China. I have to perhaps give the advice to our colleagues from China that an anti-corruption strategy in a society is much more sustainable if you don't leave it just to the political party, to the officials in the government, to the parliament. We hear this in Germany also. I mean, when we, with civil society organizations, attack, for instance, the laws about, for instance, environmental developments and so on, they say, no, we have been elected, we take the decisions, we take it for all the people, and therefore we don't really need these sort of self-appointed representatives of nobody. And I would simply say we were very happy that we have a chapter in China which is relatively independent, that in fact this conference has been handed by the Chinese to Transparency International. In 1995, I was invited in Beijing to the International Anti-Corruption Conference, and at the end of the conference, there was a question, who is going to do the next one? And I said, hey, I do it. And at the time, of course, we still had 2 or 3 employees, and therefore the next conference in Peru in 1997 was very difficult to prepare. So in a sense, I think there is a will to gradually bring civil society into a participatory situation. We have had many delegations at various meetings. We were always very interested in interacting with you. But I would say go a little bit further and give more space to civil society when they organize themselves and when they say things which perhaps you don't like to hear. You know? But I hope I'm not breaking any protocol here. But I'm really very much interested in what our colleagues from South Africa has said. I mean, it's absolutely right. Civil society, they are not by nature good. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan is an NGO. You know? So, I mean, there are terrible NGOs in the world. And therefore, we have been working very hard, for instance, to create a code of conduct for civil society organizations, which is administered by the International Civil Society Institute, which I founded in Berlin, which used to be called the Berlin Civil Society Institute. Burkhard Nerik is probably in the audience. He and I, we started this, and we are having regular meetings to make sure that this code of conduct is being observed. Civil society not only has to learn to be more open, more transparent themselves, they have to have a participatory governance structure. Transparency International, for instance, we have regular elections. I mean, 2 days ago, we had our membership meeting in the other hotel, and there our membership told the board how they want TI to be run. So she's absolutely right. There are many terrible civil society organizations. They are very often incompetent. They are not open in terms of their finances. They are not open in terms of who's behind them. Very often they are corrupt. And therefore, they are probably partly one of the reasons why governments feel they have to control them, because they as you correctly say, they are very often the channel of funding and of political influence by not transparent organizations. So the civil society organizations themselves have to shape up to grow into this role which I am recommending. And probably South Africa has a particularly vibrant civil society, because during the apartheid system, many foreign friends of South Africa, they worked through civil society because they didn't want to work through the apartheid regime at the time. So it's probably a very fertile ground for many, many different types of civil society, which are particularly hard to control. But they shouldn't be controlled by government. They should be, I mean, unless they are stealing, unless they are lying and involved in illegal activities. But somehow their strength and their legitimacy has to come from civil society itself, and I think this is possible. And I would recommend that people turn to this International Civil Society Center, which has its headquarters in Berlin, because we have regular conferences, we address these weaknesses of civil society.
All right, thank you, Peter. I'll skip Pascal for now so that you can marinate a little bit on the questions that have been asked. But Rose, citizens' involvement, do you involve citizens in promoting accountable institutions, part of Goal 16.6, as Bloomberg Associates? To what extent do you involve citizens?
100%. There are a number of tools that we have deployed in different cities for this incredibly important issue. The empowerment of citizens is extremely important. We have done the creation of hotlines in 3 US cities. We did citizen surveys where the city was doing outreaches to citizens through a survey process. We have done dashboards in 3 or 4 cities where we force the city to harness the data that it receives from citizens to understand what the issues are in education, transportation, et cetera, and to visualize ways that they can be responsive to citizens. So we're using data and we're using operational tools to empower citizens to be able to speak to and have channels to their city, can do it anonymously. We have talked to several cities about whistleblower protection laws as well, and have hardened some laws in various cities. So we are very much about empowering citizens through these tools to be able to report and react to and receive better service from their cities.
All right, thank you. George, we had talked about the situation in Brazil, and I was interested in your brief comment on, so what can be done? There's a possibility of a bad situation happening. Do you just give up and lose hope?
No.
Is there anything that can be done?
Never give up. I think the first thing to do...
That's encouraging. Never give up. So that's the starting point.
The first thing to do, in my opinion, is to emphasize more and seek for more support from the public in general to preventive measures. We have been emphasizing only enforcement, punishment, from the point of view of the public opinion, the public awareness that we succeed in generating. This awareness were biased to the side of punishment. We have to seek for more support for preventive measures, a lot of preventive measures that the government in the past years has already initiated, like increasing transparency of public expenditures, like regulations of conflict of interest, like regulation of financing of campaigns and political parties, these sorts of things that are in the preventive side. The second suggestion, the emphasis that I think is necessary, is to reduce the spectacle of the enforcement. The spectacle of the enforcement in itself, of imprisonments and this sort of thing, because it generates the idea of a condemnation of political activity, opening the way to this kind of adventures, political adventurers. The third thing is exactly the support to initiatives of the civil society. In this very moment in Brazil, civil society organizations under the leadership of the Brazilian branch of TI, of Transparency International, have been organizing a document with a series of commitments to be obtained from the candidates, not only to the presidency, but also to Congress. There are around 70 new measures, including legislative measures and other sorts of initiatives. This is an initiative of civil society in Brazil, the Brazilian branch of TI and others, and academy together. And another initiative involves the private sector, the business sector, that is also initiating a movement in terms of implementing a series of commitments fixed in the settlements of the companies that have been object of the car wash operations, commitments about compliance and things of the sort. This is also being stimulated and coordinated from the side of civil society in Brazil.
All right, thank you. Pascal, you're pushing back, you're not sharing information with other partners. The World Bank is not honest. You're still using country mechanisms which really do not provide the right environment to deal with all issues, including LGBT issues. What's your response? That's why I gave you time to marinate on those questions.
So there's basically two topics that were raised. The first one is the topic of, which is a very important topic, and that's on social and environmental safeguards. So, which is very different than the anti-corruption regime that I was speaking about earlier. I'd like to first talk again about, I mentioned the twin goals of the World Bank, so eradication of extreme poverty, and the other one is shared prosperity. The reason why we have these environmental and social safeguards is to ensure that absolutely everybody has access to the services that we are financing. If there are cases where that would, without any discrimination, and if there are cases where that would not be the case because things happen in the world, then we have systems to make sure that people who did not get the services can be heard. And so there are two levels. There is a grievance redress system, and if that doesn't work, people that feel that they have not been affected properly by projects can go to the inspection panel. The other item that was raised is very much one of openness and of sharing and of wanting to hear what is going on. On this point, I'm extremely proud, together with my friend Peter, of what the World Bank has been doing in this regard. So since President Zelik, as far as data is concerned, at the bank is very simple. Everything's open, with some small exceptions. For instance, the stuff we're looking at right now, as far as investigations are concerned, that will not be open until the investigation is over and the decisions be made. To your point, you don't want to speak about investigations or the content thereof too early because that could mess up the investigation, or innocent people might be their reputation might be smeared. So in terms of open data, we're trying to do the same thing vis-à-vis our government. So we're pushing e-government, we're pushing e-procurement, we're pushing what was the thing? The beneficial ownership. So at the World Bank is not only pushing this vis-à-vis its member governments, but for our own contracts that we're financing as well, above a certain amount, now we're disclosing beneficial ownership. So we always try and do things ourselves, and then at the same time push this vis-à-vis governments. You've seen me with this report here. I want to make a plug for one of the many reports that we're publishing, and this one is the report of the sanctions system. So that's for the first time we're reporting on integrity vice presidency, so the investigators and the adjudicators, suspension and debarment officer, office, and the sanctions board. In here, to your point on transparency, we publish all the names of the companies that have been debarred. We also, and this is of particular interest, I think, to civil society, we publish where we have made a referral report. We also publish the cross-debarment. So, as many of you may know, if a company is debarred, excluded by the World Bank for more than 1 year, it will be automatically excluded by European, African, Asian, Inter-American development banks, which of course gives it a bigger punch, to what we've done. These are also mentioned in here. But to my point on the civil society, we publish. So whenever we have a fraud or corruption case, at the end of that case, we send a referral report to the country where the company is from and to the country where the misconduct occurred. Read those reports, civil society, because you will know in which countries we've made a referral report, and that then allows you to say, hey, country, what is happening here? And this is sharing the information. And to the gentleman from Danida and anybody else who has a complaint, I would, so if it's safeguards, you go to grievance redress system and inspection panel. Anything to do with corruption, I'd like to know about it, and I'd like to mention our website. It's worldbank.org/integrity. We have a brand new complaints form, and we'd love for you to use it, and love to hear your feedback about it.
All right. Thank you very much. I have to bring this to a close. The MC may just take me for a full yoga class, and I haven't had breakfast. So thank you very much, Minister Chen, Peter Eigen, Pascal Dubois, Rose Gil-Hens, and Joel Page. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ruben, and a big thank you to the panel. Thank you. So, there's a lot of things on the agenda waiting for you, a lot of good workshops, and also there will be the film festival. There are 2 more films showing this afternoon. I will show you the trailer as you're going out. And the next plenary, which is also the closing ceremony, will be at 5 o'clock in this room. Unfortunately, I will not be able to join you. Someone else will be here to take good care of you, maybe do some yoga also, I don't know. So thank you to the ICC for inviting me, and thank you for being present. And now coffee. Thank you so much.
On the 16th of August 2012, our men went on strike to fight for a living wage. Ke i-management yezimine endaweni yoba kuze yena